I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners for the land that we're gathered on tonight, the Whadjuk Noongar people, their elders past, present and emerging, and in particular I'd like to send my thoughts and wishes to the Karana family. Mr Karana has passed away in just really the last few days or so, a giant of a man, and he has informed quite a bit of the work that I'm talking about tonight, and he's made a significant contribution to that. I'd also like to acknowledge our rivers, Derbil Yerrigan, Swan River, and Jalgara-Belia, the Canning River. Both of them, of course, are listed Aboriginal sites and spiritual places and physical resources for the entire community. And thank you to Janet and the town of Bassendean for the invitation and the lovely opportunity to have a talk about something that I really enjoy. I want to start with a quite perfect day. Perhaps it's May or June, or perhaps it's one of those marvellous days that we've just had in the last week or so. Sparkling, sunny, still, faultless days. Visitors arrive and there's plenty to see. First stop is Kings Park for a recce and context of Perth and its riverscape. The Scarp, the rivers, Morakata, Kings Park itself, an ancient and modern lookout. Across the water, our next stop, another landmark, Heathcote. Koya Place is a listed Aboriginal site and work is underway to transform it, revegetate it, a wetland. Young, vibrant Noongar rangers are on duty, mentored by elders and taught conservation and tourism skills at TAFE. The young rangers are reconciliation in action and a prelude to the 2029 Bicentenary. They're welcoming, they care for country, and they care for visitors too. One explains about the river confluence and about the fire signals between Morakata, Kings Park, and Koya Goradup, the place of the frog. This is Midjiguru and Yagan country, leaders in the world's oldest continuous culture and a mighty family. We have lunch, go to the gallery, a bus carrying tourists from a visiting cruise ship pour in to spend money on art, jewellery, ceramics, and simply to gasp at the view. Tomorrow it's a girls' day out. The Fanny Balbuck Trail begins at Mudagarup, Harrison Island. It's a trail of meditation, inspiration on the homelands of a traditional Swan River woman. It takes us to where she protested the colonial imposition on her land at the Government House gates, behind which her grandmother, Murjongul's grave lies. Her other grandmother is at the other end of the street on St George's Terrace, buried beneath Bishop's Grove. International Women's Day attracts people from all over the world to this place. They meet and walk with Whadjuk women elders in the footsteps of a celebrated female First Nation resistance fighter who lived through colonisation. We track on toward the former lake once her food gatherings stop and have lunch at Yagan Square. Tonight, it's a cruise up the river. We'll pause at Success Hill and reflect as our Noongar guide details the riverscape, Bennett Brook, the home of the Wargle, and the significance of the bend. There'll be a stunning sunset, some dolphins if we're lucky, bush tucker nibbles on the way to a degustation, accompanied by local wines from vines dating to 1895. We arrive at the original house that belonged to the Swan Colony's first Surveyor General, John Septimus Roe, now the Linton and Kay Gallery, and celebrate at Mandoon in luxurious surroundings. The Swan River is now World Heritage listed, full of sought-after tourism experiences with people from the oldest continuous culture in the capital of an internationally recognised biodiversity hotspot, with river journeys, stories, art and wine, and life-changing holiday experiences. From the Noongar, Narla Wern Kiap Kiap Wern, our spiritual water, our water of spirit. The river is the gateway to understanding and tourism in Western Australia. Well, these are some of my imaginations, or imaginings and imagination really, based on the opportunities and exceptional values of where we live, and not out of reach as we head toward the Bicentenary in 2029. It's also based on my experiences with the Swan and Canning rivers, with heritage practice, exposure to international riverscapes, leaders in thinking, culture, privileged time spent with Nyungar elders and many others moved by the riverscape. Tonight I want to share some of those experiences because they have contributed to the contemporary cultural heritage understandings of the river, and in doing so can inform some of the thinking as the Bicentenary approaches. I haven't been alone and have worked with some fantastic professionals along the way and friends. This is a cultural perspective. It's not driven by the science of the river, but by the river's cultural heritage values and community wellbeing. So let's start in Bassendean, known firstly as West Guildford and then renamed in 1922. Historians like Jenny Carter have undertaken the substantial and thorough research to produce Bassendean's history, a place boasting many rivery social connections, which encapsulates the hopes and dreams of the first settlers and the harsh realities of their everyday lives. Swimming lessons, swim-throughs, Rolf Harris, both famous and infamous, the Baptists, Chinese market gardens, the pensioner guards, big houses off the back of the gold boom, the extraordinary Success Hill Reserve, stories of standing on the Wargle, seeing the Wargle, and a 13-time champion of the Avon descent, Darrell Long, are just some of the things we value. The area is incredibly dense with historic and Nyungar sites. In 2008, I had the privilege to meet with the late elder, Mr. Karana. He was a very kind man who shared the significance of the river and this place with me. Some of his words. My mum always told me that she was born at Success Hill on the Swan River. Because my people camped and were born by the Swan River, I view these places and the river as important. I also believe that our people's camping sites, places of birth and burial sites, are significant in our connection to country. Mr. Karana also spoke of recognising the anniversary of his mother's death, and at that place floated flowers with his granddaughter in her memory. Success Hill and nearby Bennett Brook have strong significance for the Nyungar and important connections to the Wargle. The town of Bassendean has a new art and culture strategy now which articulates its community values in 2019. But for me, the town of Bassendean played a pivotal role in the development of the first statement of significance for the Swan and Helena rivers, undertaken a decade ago now with the Eastern Metropolitan Regional Council. A statement of significance for people who are not in the cultural heritage discipline is basically a really strong one-pager about why things are important. It cuts through to the intrinsic values of a space, and it also has the power to identify a riverscape as a cultural landscape. I've got a few little examples. They're kind of big sentences that describe the whole thing. The river's landscape demonstrates the ending of the Gondwana land period due to the breakup of the Indian and Australian tectonic plates following rifting along the Darling Fault Line. The rivers were formed by the mythological serpent the Wargle according to Nyungar tradition and have continuing cultural importance related to past and contemporary Nyungar culture. The river's environment is home to rare and priority flora listed on international and state-based registers. And this one, the rivers provide the opportunity for the development of greater understanding between people through the challenges of their conservation and rehabilitation as both a physical resource and a spiritual place. Our riverscape has been used intensively for millennia by humans And while there are many individual places along the river themselves holding specific cultural heritage values, an outstanding value is attached to the overall landscape as it's evolved over time. I worked on that document with Professor David Dolan and talented others. It was a tough time and a really special time. David would come to my house after chemotherapy, and we'd sit together, and this work hadn't been done before, and he'd speak and I'd write. And then I drafted a statement of significance based on a World Heritage format which was adopted from the Loire Valley in France, with which David and his wife Christine are very familiar. By doing this, we would keep the World Heritage option open, he said. There was an audit of the Upper Swan heritage values and later the other values across the entire river landscape. With some support from the National Trust and particularly from Tom Perigo, I would head to the Thames, the Seine and the Loire to better understand other rivers and also the perspectives of those who came here in the 19th century. The Thames was reckless with wicked tides and a history broken into a million pieces on its shores. You could literally pick up different times and different narratives. There were Roman roofs and macabre bones. Upstream, the River and Rowing Museum at Henley-on-Thames directors and curators were truly taken by the spiritual qualities of our river. They lamented that the Thames would always lack a spiritual quality. Paris has a different feel. The Seine was considered and hopeful. Paris's motto, fluctuat net mergator. She is tossed by waves, but she does not sink. It was apt and inspiring. Then to the Loire, with all its natural beauty, gardens, chateaux, wines, the universities that focus on heritage. Amongst it, Mission Val de Loire, the organisation which looks after the World Heritage values of the riverscape that works closely with UNESCO, environment, tourism, business, food and wine producers, the universities, more than 191 councils around the riverscape. Surely it would be possible to manage our river like this with only 21 councils and integrate the ecology, tourism, business, heritage advice and the enduring cultural commitment of the Whadjuk Noongar. UNESCO representatives and Mission Val de Loire executives welcomed the visit and reviewed our river's significance. Their recommendation was nominate our river, the Swan River, for World Heritage. I came home with this advice, recalling it was the French who first mapped our river. This is a process, but it's not an arduous process. Meantime, in Perth, new ways of considering the emotional history of the rivers were being undertaken. The Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the History of Emotions, 1100 to 1800, and particularly Professor Sue Broomhall, would contribute new ways of understanding the emotional history of the rivers. Sue and I developed a project called Rivers of Emotion, a collaboration between the Centre and the National Trust. Rivers of Emotion provided a way for all people of almost any age or culture to express their emotional connection to the river, and they did so by identifying the place and the feeling on the website. It all contributed an important component to the Marley River Park interpretation plan for the Swan and Canning rivers, involving the 21 local councils and a Noongar advisory panel, and that was produced for the state government. The plan would also explore the social values of the river. Details of 720 paintings were identified, literary works, 1,200 photos, 650 audio-visual assets, 120 oral histories. Oh, well, there was more. There was, for the first time, 450 heritage sites that were mapped on a Google map for the very first time. A series of nodes was identified around the river and an entire library was developed from these assets. In 2019, some recommendations have been implemented. A number of riverside nodes have been installed at Bicton, Point Walter, Heathcote, Brentwood, Adenia Park, a substantial river art exhibition has just been held at the City of Perth, and it's still on. It's called Tides. The artists reveal what we can't say. At that exhibition, new work by Alan Muller, and the next few paintings are by Alan. So he showcases Derbyl Yerrigan before the foundation of Perth and English settlement, reintroducing the fauna, the swans, the pelicans, to the landscape that the English had left out with their real estate depictions. Alan's work challenges us to acknowledge, as he says, that we are not a new country of new people, we are an ancient land of ancient cultured people. The lens of artist Eva Fernandez has also recently turned to our riverscape. A rare bird in the land captures the unease and a dark subconscious brought about by the unknowable landscape that was often encountered by new arrivals. And the black swan, which for a lot of history has referred to as something that's just simply impossible. Joe Derbyshire's expansive 18-metre long journey of the river, and you can see this in the city if you wish. It's an oil painting with Mary resin, commissioned for the Perth Supreme Court Civil, depicting the Swan River's changing landscape from its origins towards its termination in the Indian Ocean, with an accompanying 5 floors of digiglass introducing all visitors to other rivery layers. It's an extraordinary piece of work. Latest Tourism WA publications tell us that visitor interest in Aboriginal activity or experience clearly outweighs the offerings of the state. 82% of visitors want it, 26% of visitors do it. And the Swan River has a huge part to play. Just this year, Walter Maguire from Go Cultural Aboriginal Tours and Experiences won gold at the Australian Tourism Awards for his offerings on the Swan River, while Chief Scientist Peter Clinken has actively supported an increase in profile and respect for both Aboriginal science and Western science for tourism. It's 190 years since the foundation of Perth on the Swan River. Sailors celebrated the event in 1841 with the first regatta. Between now and summer 2021, Perth will host 17 major sailing events, including 5 World Championships and a dozen Australian Championships. In 2019, there are more than 10,000 sailors on the Swan River, belonging to 11 yacht clubs. It's a busy sailing season, with just under 150 recurring events scheduled. The river is a place to learn. It shapes champions, sports people, learners in all things wind, water, or simply patience. John Wright, aboard H28 Anna, is a living lesson in the fleet at South of Perth Yacht Club. A man with a boat, a crew, somewhere to be on Wednesdays and Saturdays. He is, for me, an inspiration. A head full of river and racing. The river's a really big place. It's easy to get lost out there. John, like all skippers, is on a tilting, changing, uneven surface, navigating 20+ knot winds over summer. And he's really hard to beat. I've tried. Most of the time I don't win. John's 82. The river keeps him and so many of us so well. I'm going to hop out of this now and play for you some videos. So there are some excerpts from documentaries I've made, and they allude to varying currents, both physical and aesthetic, the river's course and our relationship with it. You might meet some river legends, or you might just know them. The Laurel Nannup production is courtesy of the City of Perth. Other productions are freely available on the internet. Some of those include a Fanny Balbuck documentary, which was produced with the support of the National Trust and its partners, and also Lottery West. The sailing footage I shot on Saturdays. It makes a difference to be on the river. It's not flat, so I hope you enjoy.
She was born here. Her mother and father occupied this place. Her grandfather, Yalagonga, they occupied this place. I would have liked to meet her. Yeah, because, you know, I'm not a person who's very outspoken like she was. I think she is a forgotten lady, and why I like to think that she's getting recognised at last is because she is a very inspiring person to me. I would really have loved to have met her because her character was much stronger than us women now today. And she is a great woman.
She courageously stood up and not fought as we know how to fight, but stood up in ways that made people call her a troublemaker, when in fact she wasn't a troublemaker. She was actually a female warrior for her people.
The water is just alive with jellyfish everywhere. Everywhere we looked, there were just more than we could ever imagine would actually be in the water of a river. And all of us became instantly afraid. Strange, alien things that kind of seemed like they were waiting to just swallow us up if we fell overboard. Maybe I don't belong in that water. Maybe that water actually isn't mine.
This is where everything I do has a big impact, because I can't really go back and can't go forward very far, and I don't want to put too much on because I don't want to kill the painting. And by kill the painting, that's when you overdo it. It's actually more important to do less than more. And that's the hard bit. That's sort of a critical point which as an artist you have to always think about. You know, that tendency to want to tidy it all up or make it pretty or make things work, you know, just to leave it rougher and freer. Yeah, you can see every mistake in this light. It's very interesting to get to the end of this project, and I'm almost feeling like it's too small to actually cope with my idea and images of the river. So even though it's so huge, you know, to actually try and get that scope of the river was fairly ambitious. So I think it sort of jumps along a bit, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with it.
My name is Laurel Nannup. I live in Perth, Western Australia. I was born at Kerala Native Settlement. I'm a Noongar yoga and a printmaker. Seeing the boats arriving, the Noongar people would have thought that was their ancestors coming from the sea back to shore. Down the bottom there would be like the ships, but that up top would be like the food. The black people were the first in this place, in the Wedgelas, because it seems to be the centre of where they would have landed.
So those older wooden craft are the H-28s, and themselves are a nationally significant fleet with links to Rhode Island and the Herreshoffs. And the Herreshoffs are internationally recognised designers, father and son. And there's a Herreshoff museum in Rhode Island too. So it's really nice to be on those boats. Well, who am I to speak of rivers? There's a professional context, and my role in those productions was either as writer or writer-director, so I was very involved in the way all those things turned out. But there's also a personal context too. I grew up on other rivers, the Nerang River on the Gold Coast, fishing and catching worms and feeding my family with whiting and bream and flathead and flounder. It was a valued contribution of a 10-year-old. During family holidays, my parents water skied on the Hawkesbury River in New South Wales, and the answer to me not sleeping was to take me for a ride in the speedboat. My oldest ancestors lived and died in that riverscape, including Anne Forbes, later Anne Huxley, who was one of the 188 female convicts to arrive in the First Fleet in 1788. Just 16 when she arrived, through it all, and there was a lot of all, she's somehow lived till 80 years old, which I just find unfathomable. She was on the frontier with the Durag people, who had lived there forever and still do. On this side of the country, I sail heritage yachts, and I know what it's like to travel at 120 jellyfish per hour. In 2019, I'm still learning to put words and pictures to the river and fully appreciate its strengths, its vulnerabilities, its flow, its course, my place in it, on it, and next to it. But what of other riverscapes? Many of us have heard about the river in New Zealand, the Wanganui River, granted the legal rights of a person in 2014. The legislation recognises the deep spiritual connection between the Maori people and the ancestral river, described as an indivisible and living whole. It means that a riverscape has its own authority and is recognised in law as having its own needs and its own well-being. In 2017, the Yarra River in Melbourne was legally recognised as an indivisible living entity which deserves protection when a new law passed by the Victorian government combining traditional Indigenous knowledge with modern management practice to protect the Yarra River. The new Act legislates the custodian of the Woiwurrung people over the Yarra and recognises the river and the land it travels through as a living integrated entity. Would our Swan River have better health if it had better rights? Organisations such as Thames 21 work hand in hand with local communities to clean and green London's waterways under a 5-year plan championing the river. The Chief Executive says, even rivers in the heart of the most densely populated urban areas can provide inspiring opportunities for mental and physical well-being, havens for the mind and for the soul. Some of the commitments of that 5-year plan for the Thames include action plans for 50 new sustainable urban drainage systems and wetlands, increase the reed bed coverage by 10% in the lee navigation, and a commitment to undo decades of damage on a riverscape between the London boundary and Essex to improve biodiversity and increase local community access on the rivers. While in the Loire Valley, it's time to enjoy the 500th anniversary of the Renaissance. There's a commitment to musical portraits celebrating the river with pieces from the 15th and 16th century with sounds of nature and the local birds. An exhibition of fishing, a practice on the Loire since the Middle Ages, links biodiversity and climate. A conference devoted to the landscape Its representations of the Loire and inscriptions on World Heritage List and development of the strategy to 2035 focused on ways to include the integration of natural and cultural heritage into the sustainable development of the valley. In 2013, we lost the Swan River Trust as a dedicated river agency. The role and functions of the Swan River Trust were merged into the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions. The day-to-day management of the Swan River Park is now a function of Parks and Wildlife. In 2019-2020, the state budget allocation for visitor services and public programs for the Swan and Canning Rivers is just over $14 million. Less than a third of the money allocated to Rottnest Island and $8 million less than is allocated to the Perth Zoo. Perth health authorities issued a warning on the 13th of March not to eat fish and shellfish from our river. On Tuesday, the 14th of May, the health of the Swan River and warning signs on the banks from Nedlands to the Swan Valley made it to ABC Radio. Journalist Jessica Strutt spoke with UWA Professor David Pennell, traditional owner David Collard and Nyungar elder Richard Wally about the health of the river and what could be done to fix it. Main points: the impact of phosphorus, agricultural runoff, and a call for better leadership when it came to the river's future. But also from Professor Pennell, indications of existing community commitment to play a stronger role in redirecting government money to support the river's future. So people wanted to have a bit more of a say. Perhaps we need a new riverbank, a riverbank of a different kind, which people can direct their own financial support for specific river projects. WA Parks Foundation is addressing river-based projects in some ways. But there's also a call too for a comprehensive interpretation plan for all the waterways that flow into the Swan, and that should be led by Indigenous knowledge. A 10-year commitment for 200 years of degradation, said Richard Wally. That's a tangible commitment to the 2029 Bicentenary. And the good news is, in 2019, a pilot project has been established as a potential forerunner to this commitment through the Clean Air and Urban Landscapes Hub at UWA. And how do you get the Swan River World Heritage listed? Well, the first step is to nominate it for national listing. That's the first step. And there's a form for that. The information required for that form already is available. It's a decision that requires either government or traditional owner support. Perth's internationally recognised riverscape has been a drain, a rubbish tip, a sewer and a jet ski opportunity. It's also a continuing spiritual force for one of the world's oldest cultures and is central to the first and only native title claim over an Australian capital city and Australia's largest native title agreement. Would you like to see the riverscape respected and cared for in a World Heritage capacity? A happy ending always depends on where you stop the story. Heading towards our 2029 Bicentenary, we have a lot to share with the world about our rivers and a lot to learn. It's a powerful weave of ecological, social and cultural knowledge, and I think anniversaries are useful in this regard. They're a strong hook and give something to work towards that also ensures that we recognise what we've got. So to close tonight, I'm going to take you out with a song about the Narrows Bridge. And it's the 60th anniversary of the Narrows Bridge this year. It's a significant river crossing for Perth, and I'd like to do some acknowledgements for this because it's taken a bit to get this here to you tonight. So the State Library of WA has played a part in that, but also the singers Alison Fife, Robert Hoffman and pianist Tommaso Polio for their permissions. We say thank you to be able to play this evening, And this is a piece of music that is in the collection at the State Library. And these musicians played a range of the music that is kept in here, and this was one of the songs. So I thought it was apt, A, because it was the 60th anniversary, but also because bridges are about strong connections and getting to the other side.
A lovely sight to see at night the Narrows Bridge. Driving along you can see the skies aglow, it seems to know the Narrows Bridge. The windmill turns endlessly, the river Swan flows on and on, just as before, rippling along on the shore. The mill is old, the bridge is new, I think the same as you do too. It looks so gay at close of day, the Narrows Bridge.
The time has come for everyone to see the games. What a thrill for the West! Each day and night may we invite you all to see. Our empire gleams at the best, and may you stay in every way, be pleasant too. People of God welcome you.
The Narrows Bridge will show the way, no matter what the time of day. So come